Hello and welcome to Stretford Paddock. My name is Joe, that is Jay, and today we're talking about INEOS. They've been here for 18 months now. We've seen a lot of their decisions. We've seen how they are trying to run Manchester United. We're going to go through it and we're going to decide, especially in the wake of some updates to the stadium and backing the manager in a way that we've probably not really seen from a United ownership, especially backing a manager that's been under this much scrutiny, saying that he's got 3 years to prove himself. We're going to look at, do we like the way INEOS are running Manchester United? Because I know it's a sort of a pretty broad question, but it's the sort of thing that, you know, the ownership of Man United has been under such scrutiny over the last 20 years. It's been such a big part of being a Man United fan. Things are different now. Things have changed, and we're going to go through it, and I think we should go through it, especially when we get these big sort of momentous things happening at Manchester United. We should sort of take stock of the way the club's being ran and what exactly is going on. But first of all, Jay, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, man. I'm good. It's sort of reared its ugly head again, hasn't it? The ownership debate. Yeah. Now, let's talk about it's reared its ugly head again. We always criticise and talk about the Glazers, and I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon until they've gone. But the whole sort of, that little sort of 48-hour period where there was your man in Saudi tweeting that there was some sort of bid or investor coming in and people were thinking, is it another takeover? It's brought it to the forefront of everyone's thinking again, as well as some of the stadium news we've had. There's just been this sort of, news cycle, really, probably coinciding with a quiet spell during an international break, where all of a sudden, all eyes are back on INEOS again, and this question of, are they actually doing a good job? Plus, you've had the interview with Sir Jim Ratcliffe as well, which has just added more fuel to that fire. Yeah,
there's loads to get into. We'll talk about all the sort of main facets of their time at Manchester United. Let's start kind of with the stadium stuff, because that, in terms of big, lasting impact, is probably the biggest thing they'll do.
Yeah.
Obviously, winning a Premier League would last in the record books forever, but where Manchester United play its games will affect every single game for, I don't know, anywhere between 20 and 100 years, depending on how long, a new Old Trafford would last. So obviously, initially, there was all these talks about, do we want a new stadium? That was the first discussion. Then it seemed enough season ticket holders did, plus clearly Ratcliffe himself wanting that. I think that was enough to go, yeah, it's not going to be a, cataclysmic pushback if we go with what we want. Then it was this reveal of a new stadium, this sort of quite shocking but polarising design. With the sort of the tent look over the top, the tridents, this
Circus
whole
tent.
Restructured area around the current stadium. Then in recent weeks, there's been a bit of kind of pullback on that, and that actually that was just the initial design, and we're having trouble getting some of the land bought because the freight company want in the region of 10 times more for that land than we thought they would.
Yep.
There's a lot to get into. First of all, we're not getting a new stadium by 2030. I think we can, without getting, having an official word on that, probably rule that out.
Yeah,
that was the initial
definitely.
timeline.
That seemed pie in the sky, didn't it?
Yeah, and we've had sort of 8 months since then. Secondly, it seems as though a more likely scenario now is a sort of scaled down version of this kind of area that was meant to provide sort of 92,000 jobs, I think it was. What do you make of the fact we're getting a new stadium, or supposedly getting a new stadium, and the way this plan is sort of moving and almost kind of decreasing in its scope?
I don't think any of this is a surprise. I think you mentioned it probably as soon as Sir Jim Ratcliffe took over, or INEOS took over. You said arguably the biggest thing they could do is build a new stadium. If you talk about a legacy as a person, and maybe a person with a bit of ego, let's be honest, what could you do where you can go, look, that's what I've physically done to Manchester United? Yes, you can buy loads of transfers or make loads of transfers and buy new players and get us winning trophies. You can say, I helped do that. But if you can say, look, I delivered a new stadium, then long after you're gone, that will still be here, and that will be huge. Not the stadium will be huge, but that is a major part of Manchester United's history. The ground they play in, and it'll probably be, like you said, the ground for the next, potentially the next century. If you look how long we've been at Old Trafford for. So it doesn't surprise me that was sort of a flagship idea under INEOS, was we're going to have a new stadium. And as you mentioned there, I went to some of the meetings or the announcements at Old Trafford where they were discussing it and stuff, where I wasn't privy to secret information. We were invited along with other people as well, and it felt like very much like they were pushing it. They wanted a new stadium. When all the options were there, I remember when I went to the talk that Colette Roach gave, and it was like, there's redevelopment, that's one thing we're looking at, or we're looking at a new stadium, or we're looking at the sort of the perfect new stadium where it's this sort of huge area of Old Trafford or near Old Trafford getting redeveloped, and it's going to bring in all these jobs and infrastructure. Well, we're going to redo the infrastructure. it always felt like that's what they wanted to do, and then they moved towards that. Then when the stadium plans were revealed, is it Norman Foster, the dude who's the designer? After the initial sort of outrage at the design, it's a circus tent, it's this, that and the other, is it really feasible? Some people liked it, others saying this looks a bit ridiculous. There was a few articles, and I think me, you and Laurie were talking about this the other day, of people saying, actually, don't be surprised if this isn't the final design. This happens a lot when you announce a design or a new building or whatever. You come up with an idea, and then actually when it comes to building it, it doesn't always end up being the initial announcement or fitting that initial announcement. There was also talk of it might not be a 100,000 seat stadium, because that figure, whilst it's memorable and emphatic, isn't always the most cost effective way of having a bigger stadium. 90,000 might make more sense financially. So we'll have to wait and see just how that pans out. But I'm not surprised by any of this. I'm not surprised there's a new stadium on the horizon. I'm not surprised that's what they decided to go with. I'm not surprised the initial announcement has been scaled down a little bit. And I'm also not surprised that some of the suggestions and noise around it being done in 5 years is now looking unlikely as well, because that felt overly ambitious. I'm all about ambition and targets and stuff like that. And let's aim high and let's aim to get it done as quickly as possible. But it did seem a little bit unlikely, didn't it?
How much does it bother you, this? That it, I know obviously we're not sort of big in the world of architecture, so maybe it shouldn't bother us. Sorry, I'm not. I'll speak for myself.
Thank you.
Maybe I shouldn't be surprised that, like you said, that it is sort of being pulled back on a little bit. But if we were to just get a slightly bigger Emirates, that I think would bother a lot of people. The one thing I did like about the circus tent design, I don't care specifically for that design, but I loved that you could not mistake it for any other stadium in the world.
Yeah, I get that.
And I want that to be the what I don't want is another Tottenham Stadium, another Emirates, another Allianz, another bang, 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 oval in the middle of a car park. I don't want that. And I don't want it to be the case that, every sort of a glass-faced oval is just United's new stadium. Whatever it ends up being, I think something unique has to be there, or otherwise what is the point? And also, if you go from 75,000 to 85, again, what's the point? Make the South Stand bigger, then you've got 85, 90,000 right there, and you keep the history. Unless it's going to be, like you said, this emphatic, even if 100,000 is just an arbitrary number, which it is. I mean, it's all arbitrary numbers, really, isn't it? I know, assuming they can fill it. I think that is such an emphatic number that part of football is this sort of chest out, showing off. We've got 100,000, we've got six figures in our stadium. No one else can say that. I think it is worth the extra, because otherwise, what is the point? You're knocking down all this history for a slightly bigger stadium, but all the area around it isn't that good because you've got a freight company right next to it.
Yeah,
unless it's going to be spectacular, I really don't see the point. Do you agree with that, or do you think a bit more legroom and some nicer sort of stuff to buy in there, that might be worth knocking Old Trafford down for?
I get the idea of a match day experience. I know a lot of fans hate that, and legacy fans, as they call us, are against that. I go to Old Trafford, I go to the game, I leave, I go home. I'm not one of them who's up for going there 3 hours before kick-off and spending the day there. But when you take your kids, it would be nice to be able to go, if you wanted to, get something to eat, or get a drink, or do something, or maybe stay after the game and if there's a game on afterwards, not at Old Trafford, obviously another Premier League game or whatever, stay and watch that there. I get the idea of that, of having that match day experience, and I get that a lot of fans travel from overseas. So if you're coming from Scandinavia or America or wherever, I'm not going to list all the areas of the world, but if you're travelling from overseas and this might be your only trip to Old Trafford, maybe even in your lifetime, I've got nothing against the so-called day trippers. That's not an issue. That's what makes Manchester United such a big and great club, is our global fan base that me and you've experienced firsthand when we've been to Thailand and Australia and America. It's fantastic, and those supporters just as passionate as you or I. And so I get the idea of let's have a stadium where you can do more than just go to the game, because let's be honest, there's sod all to do at Old Trafford.
Yeah. Or even around it.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
You can go and sell football if you want. You can go.
But 75,000 people can't go to
you
football.
can stand on the street eating fish and chips, which is fine.
Yeah.
But it's not an experience like no other, is it? Let's be honest. So I get all that. And I would like to see that happen to Old Trafford. I would like to see it be a little bit more of an occasion when you go there, for not necessarily for myself, although I might take advantage of it, but just for general fans as well. I also think that United should be expanding. I think we should have more than 73,000 and odd in it, I think, is the capacity. Yeah. Certainly whenever I've been there, it's been rammed. It's always a 73,000 announcement. So I get you want more than that. I think there are some issues with trying to redevelop Old Trafford with the railway line and the canal that's limited it. Also, we know there's issues in the stadium with the concrete falling on your head. I think we had it at the women's game. You are a bit squashed. There's a lot that's going on, the flooding and all that. It's like, how many times can you revamp Old Trafford before you have to go, look, we cannot keep revamping a 100-odd-year old stadium. It's just not fit for purpose anymore.
But I think if you spent 700 million on it, rather than 40 here, 20 there, 8 here, patch that up there. You know, if we gutted all of the sort of the concessions and everything, you know, pulled all the seats out, took all, you know, not took the roof off, but completely reworked, maybe even took the roof off, reworked the way the whole stadium is built, not the foundations and the fundamentals of it. The spaces are going to be the same size, but when you're walking through and you sort of go to get a beer and everything's a bit plasticky and it's just a sort of a thin board over a bit of concrete, you know, that could be changed. And it could, I think you could do a major facelift. Instead of spending 2 billion on this site, maybe you spend a third of that, or 750 million on Old Trafford. I feel like you could make meaningful difference.
I think part of the problem with that idea was the approach of doing it incrementally at Old Trafford. Was still limited to how much you can do to it because of the where it is,
limited,
and also for many years you'd have a reduced capacity whilst all this is going on. I think that was one of the things they said. Because you're going to have half. Remember you won't remember because you weren't born. No, that's some excuse. But when they did up the Stretford end, and it was like we all had to have those plastic cagoules and all that stuff, and it was you had a reduced capacity while it was being done because you had to do some of it during the season. There was just no way around it. Yeah. And I think that's what they were saying at that meeting is you are going to have, if you're going to do what you've suggested and revamp Old Trafford, then you're going to have to do it in bits. And during that time, you cannot just do it in the summer. It's going to last longer than the summer, so you're going to have a reduced capacity.
It'd have to be a sort of Barcelona situation, wouldn't it, where you're playing at another stadium for a while.
And that in itself is a massive issue, I think, because the amount of fans, even if you said, right, we ain't going to have 70,000 fans because no stadium can hold that, so we want a stadium that holds 40 or 50,000 fans. Where's that going to be? City or I don't think they said was an option for whatever reason. Well, the obvious reasons. So I don't know how that would work. I don't know. I think that was one of the issues they had when they were looking at it. Whereas if you go, well, actually, we'll just build a stadium down the road right near Old Trafford that's got all the things we want in it, it makes more sense to them. Yeah. You might argue otherwise. You might say, well, I'd rather we did the bit where we had reduced capacity for 5 years or whatever, and we kept it at Old Trafford right there where it is rather than down the road. I hear all that. Me personally, and I was saying this back in 2020 or whenever it was, I first did that thing for the Beeb. I was saying I just think there's only so many times you can see Old Trafford get redeveloped before you go, it's just not working, man. It's just not. It's like, I love Old Trafford. I've got many great memories there. But I think if you build a new stadium, those memories will come with you. I think it'll still be, iconic. It'll still be a stadium. You can still have things like, you can put the Munich tunnel there, the Munich clock, take all the statues, obviously, that are there, the Jimmy Murphy statue, the Trinity statue, the Busby and Fergie statues. You can move all that and you can still keep that sense of Manchester United. And also, if you're down the road as well, it helps because you're not like, well, we're going to move to. No, you're
probably getting off at the same tram stop. Yeah, you probably you can visit the same pubs on the way.
You can see it from Media City or whatever. Or
still get a meal deal from the big Tesco.
Yeah, I mean, look, even things around Old Trafford have changed.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. When I started going, Media City didn't exist. No. It wasn't a thing.
When I started going,
yeah, it's like there's the whole landscape of Manchester has changed. Yeah. And I think that there comes a point where you go, do we have to move with the times? And I think this is at least this is a realistic plan as well, because remember when we were seeing those plans for the Sheikh Jassim Stadium that was going to run from, I think was it from Cheetham Hill to Salford, or not even from Cheetham Hill, Salford. That's not that far. Like that it was from Cheetham Hill basically to Altrincham. Yeah. It was kind of like we were going to flatten the city centre to build this stadium, and people were sharing it on social media, going, "Yeah, that's what it's going to look like."
Yeah.
So
it's going to be 2.5 million seats, and it's going to ruin all of Manchester. Speaking of seats, by the way, let's have a look at this sort of seat licence thing.
Yeah.
Well, I've read about this, and I still don't know what the fuck it means. To pardon my language.
Yeah.
It's basically a sort of American concept where, and this is where I don't quite get it. So essentially they give you a chance to buy your seat and access to that seat on a long-term deal.
Right.
So maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years. That is to be determined. Right. that will give you access to that seat for non-footballing events that may take place in the stadium. So basically, it's like putting your pint pot behind the bar. That's Tommy's pint pot. You can't have that.
Okay.
One. So that's always going to be there for you. However, so let's say it's $5,000 or $10,000 for 20 years, whatever, £500 a year.
Yeah.
However, though, you still have to buy your season ticket on top.
Right.
And if you don't pay for a season ticket, you get kicked out of that seat.
Right.
So you have to buy it and a season ticket at the same time.
Okay.
And also, what if you don't want to go and see Ariana Grande?
Yeah.
Or I don't even know what would be that. Post Malone that night. Like, you might not be interested. I don't, and I think there might even be more to it. So basically, but it's not. There isn't more to it than that. Certainly, from what I could see, I think this is, I've read about it on multiple articles. I've watched multiple sort of YouTube videos about it. I'm trying to work out what it is. But as far as I can see, it's literally just that. It's like going, I've got a Cineworld pass, so I pay £12 a month, and then every time I get there, I have to pay £8 to watch the film as well. What's the point, Jay?
Yeah, I mean, it seems a little bit odd. Me personally, I'm not interested in going to watch, I don't know, Ariana Grande or Post Malone
or Monster Trucks.
Yeah, Monster Trucks or whatever, or Tyson Fury versus Anthony Joshua.
Yeah,
I'm not bothered.
Penn and Teller fool us.
Yeah, I'm not bothered. Like, that's not really for me. I get if some people are, and I think there's an element of you're investing in this and you're helping build this stadium, and
I would always prefer that.
That's all very nice. But last time I checked, INEOS are worth billions of pounds. Sir Jim Ratcliffe's worth billions of pounds. So I don't think he needs my dough to make a stadium. If he does, he shouldn't have been building it in the first place if he's relying on Jay and Joe to help fund it. So I'm not really for this. I'd have to look more into it. It does seem a little bit daft to me and not something that is appealing to me personally. But again, I'm a middle-aged man who barely ever goes to gigs, so others might look at it and go, actually, I quite like this idea. Fair enough, just not for me. I'd rather just pay for my season ticket, have my season ticket like I have at Old Trafford, where if I renew each season, I've got the same seat with my friends. I'm not getting moved, I'm not getting turfed out. That is mine as long as I want to keep it. And in a romanticised world, and it's not even romanticised, I'm hoping that one day, and that might even be by the time this new stadium comes around, I might end up not even renewing. I might one of my kids might end up taking over my season ticket. I don't know. Yeah. We'll have to wait and see, because it might coincide with the time when they're going to all the matches and I'm getting too old and knackered to bother.
Yeah. It's a very weird concept. I think we need the specifics before it seems like anything other than just
something
a rip-off.
On the surface, it's like, seems sort of geared towards outrage. What is this? Yeah. But then you look at it and you might go, okay, it makes some form of sense. From what I've read and from what I've seen, I'm not a fan, and it doesn't appeal to me, but others may.
As long as it's not compulsory.
Yeah.
And also, I think there was some reports that suggested it may just be for the more premium seats, which again, in a new stadium, we don't even know what premium seats look like. If it's a box, who cares? Yeah. Do you know what I mean? That they are ludicrously priced for people with shitloads of money, or businesses who might buy one for a year, whatever. If they want to spend 20 grand on 10 years worth of whatever, I don't mind, but it doesn't need to be compulsory for other people.
They just need to make sure this new stadium, does have tickets that are affordable.
Yeah, of course.
For especially for younger fans, the new generation fans, so they can go, because City were literally giving away tickets at one point to get fans through the gate, and they've won a lot of trophies during the last 10 years, so now it's easier for them to get fans through there. Whereas United, we're going to end up getting left behind if we're not careful, because it can happen. Yeah, it
can. Let's move on to some of the criticism, because we've got other stuff to go through, but there's been criticism around a load of different things. One of them has been the job cuts. That's been a sort of constant thing. I think around sort of 400 or 450 or so.
I think 450
of the again, around 1,200 or so staff have been sacked, basically, or offered redundancy. That's basically a third of the workforce has left or been told you're gone. I don't know how arbitrary that figure was. I don't know if Jim Ratcliffe and INEOS have got a track record of going to their new acquisitions and going, you will get rid of a third of your staff or a quarter of your staff. It seems a little bit, it's 1 over however generous Jim Ratcliffe is feeling. That's how many staff, you might get 1 over 5, but United got 1 over 3 are going to have to get sacked. And obviously that has pushback, because these are real people. Of course, in any business there might be someone who's slacking, but there's no way a third of Manchester United staff would look at themselves and say, I wasn't doing my job properly. It was clearly just, we need to cut this number down by this much, get it done.
It was the worst way of doing it as well, because you had several rounds.
Yeah.
If you have one round of cuts, it's like ripping off a plaster. Everyone, that hurt, okay, we move on. But it was like we had one round and it was like, right, that's it now, I won't do any more. And then you did it again.
Yeah.
You're like, why are you making, you know what I mean? Just when the sort of noise from that has calmed down and people think, oh, actually my job might be safe. Well, you thought it was, but it isn't.
Yeah.
It's not it was the worst way to do things. And I spoke to people, I know people that have worked at United, and some have left and some are still there. And the atmosphere went down the toilet. It really did. And people were unhappy. People were, you know, colleagues were upset or losing colleagues, or some, you know, you're losing your own job or whatever. And Old Trafford and United have always had this weird sort of atmosphere and feeling, in the sense that we're one of the biggest clubs in the world. We're owned by these absolute parasites. Yet somehow, despite those things, we've always been able to maintain this almost family feel when it comes to the staff. And that seems to have gone now with INEOS, which is a shame. And I do feel sorry for anyone who's losing a job, especially at Old Trafford and Manchester United, where a lot of the staff there weren't on the best wages, but they were working for United and the United fans, and that was a big sort of carrot for everyone. Whereas now that's sort of gone. So that whole staff cutting thing, whilst I understand the need to cut costs, and it did feel as though we maybe had too many staff when you look at us compared with other clubs. I know we're bigger than a lot of other clubs, but even so, however, the way they went about it, was horrendous. And also, some of the effects of those staff cuts seem to be detrimental, because we're hearing rumours or reports, you know, that litter lying around in the training ground and toilets not getting cleaned, and we've seen trouble with ticket office or whatever because of the lack of staff, which that's not cost effective.
No,
that's just
making the product worse.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be like that.
No. Another area where, you know, some of that money may have gone is improving the training ground. 50 million or thereabouts on the training ground. I think obviously facelift wise it's great. I don't think they added that much in terms of sort of state of the art kind of changes to things. I think it was very much modernising. Obviously some of the pools and some of the, you know, details of the technical stuff I'm sure are state of the art now, but it wasn't a complete, right, Carrington, shut down, rebuild, go again. But it does seem to have made a difference to sort of morale. It feels like it's more up to date. It looks more befitting of, you know, you see people training for the first time holding their shirt sometimes at the training ground. It used to look a little bit dated and sort of out of touch. That's presumably a positive.
Yeah, I mean, that was the big thing when Ratcliffe took over and he put in the 300 million, whatever it was, I forget the figure, forgive me, was that the training ground was going to get redeveloped. That was like a tangible sort of reaction, or tangible benefit, I should say, of his purchase of Manchester United shares. It was like, look, this is what you are going to see and we are going to get because of this. So that was what everyone looked at, or a lot of people looked at as an obvious positive. Now we're seeing that. I know there's still some issues around some of the youngsters where they're training and stuff like that and having to get ready, and there's always been this sort of shadow of the women's team hanging over them in terms of they're not really done enough for the women's team, and that's, I think, still needs addressing. But it does seem like they are moving forward with the training ground, and it does feel like a positive. I think redeveloping and spending money on the training ground shouldn't be a negative. That is what Manchester United should do.
It's a good thing to do.
And I think that I did an article ages ago, I think it was for one of the papers, where I said, like, you know, the training ground under the Glazers went from state of the art and modern to vintage. It was like in 20 odd years they didn't touch it, and you'd have things like, you know, I don't know, Louis van Gaal cutting down trees, or Jose ripping down cameras and Ollie putting them back up or whatever, but it wasn't anything seismic. It was literally like, oh, can we move that tree, and can we, you know what I mean, take that down, and nothing major. Whereas now there has been a major redevelopment, and we'll see how it pans out, but that for me feels like a positive. It might only be, you know, a relatively small one in the grand scheme of things, but it is a positive.
And also in terms of like getting the players to be in a better mood, be sort of more motivated, it's probably a relatively
great
decent
point
thing.
Because Ronaldo, when he did that horrendous interview with Piers Morgan, that was one of his criticisms, is the stadium and the training ground hasn't changed since I left in 2009, and he came back in 2021 or whatever it was, and it was the same. Let's
sort of funnel our way down to the first team then. A lot of turmoil in terms of staff members behind the scenes. Literally too many to go into. Obviously, we spoke at length about Dan Ashworth, and that was all a bit of, a little bit silly. Yes, you might say they were decisive, but they wasted a lot of money bringing him in. But from the CEO to sporting director to, basically, academy heads, scouting heads, I'm literally running out of words because there's an endless number of jobs. Basically, everyone of high profile note, between the manager, well, including the manager now, has changed since they got here. I don't want you to go through on an individual basis of yes or no, but have you been impressed by the fact that we're trying to bring in overall sporting people, the likes of Murtagh and Arnold, and obviously before that Woodward? Those aren't the types of people we're hiring anymore. Is that a good thing?
I think it was a good thing. Someone like John Murtagh, for example, anything I heard about him wasn't positive.
Yeah.
Whether that was in the papers or people I spoke to that worked with him, it was usually negative. And I think his track record was a bad one. Woodward, I know it was a little while ago, was a disaster on all fronts. Arnold didn't seem much better. So football people who've got pedigree and have had success elsewhere coming in, even if it is with them blue lot, I get it, I understand it. I think the Dan Ashworth thing, I can't just dismiss that and go, well, they were decisive. It was ineptitude of the highest order. You spent months trying to get this guy from Newcastle. Yeah. You paid out, I think, a big load of compensation to him, and then within a few months you sacked him because he basically didn't want to bring in Ruben Amorim, or because he was pushing back on some of the cuts you were making to the football department, or because he went on holiday the day after Ruben Amorim arrived. However, whichever story you believe, whatever the reasoning is behind it, that was a mistake. Now, I don't expect them to be infallible. They will make mistakes. I get it. It's human nature. You do. And the best thing you do when you make a mistake is try and rectify it as quickly as possible, which is what they would argue they did do. However, it did look a bit shambolic because all the fanfare of getting Dan Ashworth, we've got Dan Ashworth, we've got Omar Barada, we've got Jason Wilcox. These are footballing people. We know what we're doing. You can't fault that. And then it's like, oh yeah, we've sacked him after a few months because he's had a row with, or Sir Jim Ratcliffe doesn't like his list of candidates for the new manager's job. Seemed a little bit stupid. Yeah. All the other changes. And this is probably my mantra a little bit with INEOS. We'll wait and see. Yeah. Jason Wilcox might be mint. He might be the best thing that's happened to United since Fergie. He might be a disaster. We don't know yet.
No. But what I will say is, I have a feeling that we've got a better chance of Ashworth not Ashworth, sorry, of Wilcox and Barada being a success than Murtagh and Arnold.
I agree with that.
Just because of their track record.
My only worry now, I agree with everything you've said. Yeah. We're at this stage now where the good thing that the likes of Arnold and the likes of maybe not Arnold, sorry, the likes of Murtagh and certainly Woodward had going for them was they inherited a squad that still had a lot of mint players from the Fergie era in it. Yeah. Now we're at a completely new era. Yeah. I think we haven't got any players left from Sir Alex Ferguson's days. I think this is the first time since the 40s we've had players, no players from either the Busby or Ferguson era in the squad at all, which is insane. It just shows more about them two than it does just about the club. Yeah. So we'll have to wait and see. It's tough. It is, but these are people that have been brought in for a reason. Like you said, INEOS have approached it with who's the best people we can get. Barada obviously did very well at City. Wilcox did well at City. I know he's only at Southampton briefly, so you can't really say much into that. And they've been bringing in all these other people. It's Steve Torpy, I think. Is it Steve Torpy, the other one they brought in? Other people.
Christopher Vivell as well.
Christopher Vivell, you did a great video on. So it makes sense on the outside, but we'll see. Yeah. Because at the minute, we haven't seen any tangible results from it all.
Next step down in the pecking order is the manager. Yep. And not just who they've brought in, which I think certainly at the time of bringing him in, we saw why they did. It's not gone very well on the pitch, but we have then seen, and this again is a sort of a noteworthy point, Jim Ratcliffe coming out this week saying, I want to give him 3 years. That doesn't mean there's no chance of sacking him in the meantime, but in terms of the manager and the way they are kind of dealing with this manager, how have you sort of, I don't want to say, it's hard to say, isn't it? Because obviously it's so bad in terms of the results. But how have you viewed what they've done?
It makes sense, a lot of what's gone on. Yeah. People will say, like, why has this guy not been sacked? I know there's been a lot of that because he finished 15th, he lost the cup final to Spurs. We got knocked out of the Carabao to League 2 Grimsby. But when me and Laurie were talking about it the other day, and I was saying, like, at what point would you have sacked him? At what point was the one where you go, there? Would you have sacked him at the end of his first season when he didn't have a full season, even though he wanted one?
Ridiculous.
That would have seemed slightly premature. Would you have sacked him after the Grimsby game when it's so early in the season? Yeah. Again, that's
the third game of the season.
Yeah, that would have maybe felt a little bit premature again. I think when we get to Christmas, we'll have a clearer idea of where Amorim's at, where INEOS are at with him, and whether this is going to work out. Sir Jim Ratcliffe has said these words about backing him. We spoke to James Jackson on Friday. He was saying that, it's not necessarily the case that means his job's safe. Yeah. And we kind of figured that anyway. So I think with Amorim, in all honesty, the best I can say is we'll have to wait and see. Because real and truly, evidence-wise on what we've seen on the pitch, it isn't great.
No. Next step down then is players. Obviously, we sort of looked at this the other day, but I think of the 10 kind of first team or first team adjacent players that United have signed, we deemed there to have been roughly 8 that we thought were positive or good signings.
Yeah.
I think it was only Ugarte and Xerxes where we sort of went not sure about them. But the likes of Mazraoui, De Ligt, obviously you've got this summer we've got Mbeumo, Cunha, Sesko, Dorgu as well. All of these are very, very good players, and certainly they're not necessarily guaranteed to have great careers at United, but it seems to be a better hit rate under this ownership than the previous one, and certainly, under Woodward.
It looks like that.
Yeah.
I mean, we have been here before a little bit. I remember the summer where we signed Martinez and Casemiro and Ericsson, and I know Anthony, everyone was going, you've massively overpaid for him, but it looks like there's a player there after he scored 3 and 3 or whatever.
Yep.
But everyone, the Butcher was a cult hero immediately. Ericsson, free transfer. How have we got Ericsson on free? This is mint. Even Malacia was getting a lot of credit. And then you fast forward a year and everyone's like, none of these are working out the way we wanted them to.
Yeah.
So we'll have to wait and see, but they certainly make a lot of sense. And so far what I've seen from them playing for Manchester United, they look very good. Yeah. Other than Ugarte, I think you mentioned, and Xerxes. Even Xerxes look good. He's just probably not at the levels consistently that we need, and also finds himself surplus to requirements. Yeah. But the signings look like they make sense, and I'll keep saying that that phrase makes sense, but they kind of do.
I think that's largely it. Obviously, there's more detail, more sort of, we could get more granular with any of those things, but I think those are the big sort of washers of what INEOS have done. Not out of 10 ranking, but how do you feel about it? Because now there's this talk that there may be this other investor coming in.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go into too much detail on that because there isn't much detail. But obviously, once was the day that any change to the current ownership when it was just the Glazers was welcomed, almost regardless of who it was. Yeah. I know people had their opinions in INEOS or Qatar as it's transpired, but just getting them out or getting them to have less control, which they seem to have, and I know they're not fully gone, which we all want. But would you feel happy with INEOS now being ousted potentially? How would you rate what they've done and them as owners in the sort of, 18 to 20 months they've had so far?
I think you have to give them a bit more time. I think they needed that. They need that. And I get that. Because we all, look at some of the things we're having to do. We've got a new manager. You're talking about a new stadium. The club was in a lot of turmoil when they arrived. I know you could look at it and you go, well, we wasn't that long ago before they took over that we finished 3rd or whatever it was, or was it around that time of that season they took over? Sorry, but look, we know there was a lot of changes needed, and they've been making those changes. And one thing I will give Ratcliffe is he is, very vocal, and he does speak to the media a lot, which the Glazers never did. Not when it comes to talking about Manchester United. And he said about this. He said about it's not going to be overnight, and I get that. I do understand that. So I think so far, it's been understandable, I think is the word I'd use. I can get where they're coming from, but I can't go, it's been an unmitigated success, because we don't know what's going to happen with Ruben Amorim. They haven't brought in a manager who's hit the ground running.
No.
He hasn't. Now, long term, he might smash it, but so far, the results have been borderline terrible. In terms of the transfers, they look positive, but again...
Let's see how they are in 2 years.
Because in terms of the actual amount of football matches we've won, it's been atrocious. We haven't won any trophies, and call me old-fashioned, I quite like that as a fan. And the plans for the stadium, which are now changing, look great, but we're not sat in it.
No.
I mean, you aren't stood in the new Stretford and cheering the team on, so we'll have to wait and see. So it just feels like the jury's out. I get where they're coming from, I understand what they're doing, but I can't get too carried away just yet, because in terms of actually tangible results, we can't tell yet. It's too soon. Just before you do wrap up, your thoughts?
Yeah, I largely agree. It's all a bit too early, and things in football take 5 years spells on, not 1.5, 2 years. But I think, just as a starting point, it's been far better than the Glazers.
Okay.
I think I'm quite comfortable in saying that. I think the people they've hired, the way that things have been sort of managed, being ruthless with the squad, at least trying to make changes to the stadium, make the fan experience better, look ahead in terms of keeping up with modern football. At least they seem like they're around. They're here, they know what Manchester United is. Jim Ratcliffe knows what Manchester is. Yeah. I do think that's a starting point that puts them substantially above the Glazers. I don't like the cuts, the way, like you said, especially the way they happened, and a lot of things they've done seem a bit, that doesn't seem quite right, and why did you sack him if you're just going to bring someone else in, and this, all of those things. But I'm more optimistic now than I was 2 years ago.
Okay.
100%. And like you said, let's wait another couple of years and then we'll see where we are then. But what they've done, like you said, makes a lot more sense than the 15 or so, 18 years of the Glazers before INEOS got here. And that for me is a positive. Hopefully, they can either take on some more of the club so that the Glazers don't own it, or someone else does. But yeah, definitely better than what we had, and that's a step in the right direction, I'd say.
That's fair enough.
Yeah. Right, thank you very much.
Enjoyed that, bro.
Jay, thank you for joining us at home as well. Get your thoughts in on INEOS so far, and would you welcome other investors, maybe even taking some of INEOS's shares away from them, or do you think we need to see what their plans are and see them through? Thank you very much. We'll see you in a bit.